Have you ever been like deeply wronged by a situation and someone tries to comfort you by patting your arm and offering up that famous cliche?
Oh, I think I know the exact one you're talking about.
Yeah, you know the one. They say, justice may be late, but it is never absent.
Right, right.
It's supposed to act as this ultimate societal soothing mechanism. I mean, just a way to tell you that the universe will eventually, balance the scales.
Like a cosmic guarantee.
Exactly. But what if that comforting phrase is just fundamentally flawed? Like, what if while you are sitting there waiting for your personal vindication to finally arrive, it isn't just stuck in traffic? What if it is completely missing from the timeline?
It forces a deeply unsettling realization, honestly. Because if your version of justice is entirely absent from the room, you have to look around and ask, well, what is currently occupying its seat?
And that incredibly uncomfortable question is basically the launching pad for today's deep dive.
It really is.
We are looking at a truly remarkable essay written by the author Lin Xiaoyang, which, by the way, was published exactly today, April 25th, 2026.
Hot off the presses.
Literally today. And the mission of our conversation right now is to unpack Lin Xiaoyang's entire framework. We're going to explore why your personal definition of justice sometimes gets utterly defeated.
Yeah, and how societies actually write the rules of the game.
Right, and perhaps the most fascinating of all, how radical fringe ideas, the kinds of things people label as pure insanity, somehow manage to evolve into everyday, undeniable common sense.
Lin Xiaoyang's piece is so compelling because it takes that very intimate, isolating emotional experience of, feeling cheated by the world and uses it as a microscope
A microscope for what, exactly?
for examining the entire scope of human history. I mean, it's huge.
I am genuinely amazed at the connections he makes here. By the end of this essay, Lin Xiaoyang is drawing straight lines from ancient Greek philosophy directly to modern tech billionaires tinkering in California garages.
It's a massive conceptual leap.
It is. So let's start at the foundation. Lin Xiaoyang opens by completely dismantling the idea of justice being late.
Right. He argues that when you feel your justice is absent, it isn't floating in some cosmic void waiting for its cue.
It's not just waiting backstage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead, someone else's definition of justice is currently present and victorious.
He essentially shatters the illusion that justice is this universal monolith, a singular glowing orb that every human being inherently understands in the exact same way.
Because it's highly subjective.
Okay.
I mean, there is your justice and there is their justice.
Yeah.
When you look at a situation and feel it is fundamentally unfair, but the system or the majority around you looks at the exact same situation and feels it is perfectly fine, you are experiencing a collision of definitions.
So justice isn't a fixed object we discover. It's more like a temporary agreement we reach.
That leads directly into Lin Xiaoyang's concept of linguistic consensus.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, think about how language works. If you and I share the same internal definition of what the word justice means, we have no communication barrier. We share a consensus.
Makes sense.
Now, scale that dynamic up to a population of millions. If a massive group of people shares an identical understanding of justice, that linguistic consensus becomes an incredibly tangible tool.
Because once everyone speaks the same conceptual language, you can start building actual physical structures.
Exactly.
You can take that shared definition and write it into binding, restrictive contracts that govern how human beings interact with one another.
And according to Lin Xiaoyang, that specific transition moving from a shared invisible language to shared physical rules, that is the very bedrock of a rule of law society.
So the laws you obey every day are just the written, enforceable version of what the current majority has already agreed justice means.
You nailed it.
Okay, let me hit pause and push back on this a little bit because this sounds a bit like mob rule, dressed up in academic term.
Okay, I see where you're going.
If justice just boils down to, well, whoever has the consensus gets to write the laws, I have a major problem if I wasn't even invited to the room where they define the terms.
That's a very fair point.
Right. What if a specific interest group or a ruling class just deadbolted the doors, decided what justice meant for their own benefit, and then shoved those rules down my throat?
That is the crucial friction point, and Lin Xiaoyang actually anticipates it. He outlines two distinct scenarios for why your personal justice might be locked out of the prevailing consensus.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is the passive scenario you just alluded to. You simply weren't invited. But Lin argues that you cannot just sit on the sidelines and complain about the lack of an engraved invitation.
Because no one's going to just hand you one.
Right. Building consensus is an active, messy struggle. You have to fight to participate in the conversation.
No one is going to hand over the pen to the societal rule book just because you feel left out. But what about the second scenario?
This is where it gets intense.
Yeah, what if I am actively banging on the door, trying to participate in defining these rules, and the people inside use physical force to keep me out?
Like state power.
Exactly. What if the majority use the state power or violence to block me from the process entirely?
This is where Lin Sha-yang introduces a very sharp, almost radical legal philosophy. He asserts that every individual has a fundamental, undeniable right to defend their inclusion in the rulemaking process.
Wow.
And crucially, he takes it a step further. If you are forcibly excluded from the process of defining justice and drafting the rules, you technically have absolutely no moral or legal obligation to follow the resulting laws.
Wait, really? That is a staggering claim.
It is.
He is saying that if I am physically shut out of the consensus building phase, the resulting social contract just doesn't bind me whatsoever.
Yes. He frames participation not just as a nice-to-have right, but as the absolute prerequisite for demanding societal obligation from an individual.
So if the state cuts off your voice, they simultaneously sever your obligation to their rules.
That's Lin's argument, exactly.
Which really makes me think about the structures we actually live under. Because if our personal internal justice differs from the majority, the reaction we get depends entirely on who is holding the microphone.
Right, the environment matters.
Yeah, like some systems will deploy the military to crush a dissent in view, while others will hand you a permit to debate it in the town square.
And to explain why those reactions are so wildly different, Lin Sha-yang provides an architectural breakdown of human societies.
How does he categorize them?
He divides these environments into two distinct models: power societies and civil societies.
Let's look at power societies first, because they kind of represent the environment where that door is completely deadbolted.
Yeah, in a power society, language, justice, and the resulting laws are manufactured entirely top-down.
They don't bubble up organically?
Not at all. They're handed down by an authority. Historically, you see this framed as, like, the divine right of kings, or in authoritarian dictatorships.
Because freedom of speech just does not exist in this model.
Exactly. There is no true linguistic consensus among the people. There is only the illusion of consensus, forced by fear. The ruling power simply dictates the definition of good and backs it up with force.
And Lin Sha-yang highlights a very specific, suffocating legal philosophy that basically acts as the operating system for these power societies.
The overarching principle for citizens in a power society is, what is not prescribed is forbidden.
Think about what that actually means for a human life.
It's terrifying.
It's like playing a deeply oppressive board game where the game master is a total control freak.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Right. Before you take your turn, the game master hands you a card dictating the exact 3 physical moves you were allowed to make. You cannot explore the board.
You definitely cannot invent a new strategy.
No way! If you try to move your piece in a way that isn't explicitly written on that card, you are thrown straight into jail. What is not prescribed is forbidden means zero innovation, zero personal agency.
Building on your board game analogy, you can see why an organic consensus can never form there. The players aren't even allowed to talk about the rules, let alone change them.
It's completely static.
Exactly. Contrast this with Lin Sha-yang's second category, which is civil societies. Here, the entire architecture is inverted. The power structure is built bottom up.
So the authority doesn't drop from the sky.
Nope, it is generated by the people.
Yep.
Individuals agree to temporarily surrender a tiny, highly specific fraction of their personal freedom to create a baseline of laws.
And because the power flows in reverse, the legal philosophy flips entirely.
In a civil society, the operating philosophy for the individual is deeply liberating. It's what is not prescribed is permitted.
So, bringing it back to the board game.
Let's hear it.
In a civil society, the rulebook doesn't tell you how to play your turn. It just tells you where the outer edges of the physical board are.
Right, like don't step off the table.
Yeah, don't step off the table and don't steal cash from the bank. But inside those broad boundaries, you are completely free to invent any bizarre, untested strategy you want.
Furthermore, Lin Sha-yang points out a brilliant caveat here.
What's that?
In a civil society, that oppressive, restrictive philosophy we talked about earlier, what is not prescribed is forbidden. It still exists, but it is applied exclusively to the government, not the people.
Oh, wow. So the state is only allowed to do exactly what the citizens have explicitly authorized it to do.
Exactly. The edges of the board apply to the players, but the game master is locked in a straitjacket.
That is a fascinating way to frame it.
And Lin emphasizes that true organic consensus can only ever form in this civil society model. It requires the raw oxygen of freedom of speech.
Because you simply cannot figure out if millions of people share the same definition of justice if they are terrified to even open their mouths.
Precisely.
Okay, let's follow this logic. Say you are fortunate enough to live in a free civil society. You have freedom of speech. The power is bottom up.
You're playing by the rules.
Yeah, but your specific personal idea of justice or your brilliant new invention still doesn't have consensus. You pitch it, and the vast majority of society looks at you and says, you are out of your mind. That is entirely wrong.
It happens all the time.
Are you just fundamentally mistaken then?
Not necessarily. In fact, Lin Xiaoyang introduces a concept here that completely reframes how we view those rejected ideas. He argues that if your dissenting idea aligns with natural law, meaning it holds a universal, practical truth, but just hasn't achieved mass societal recognition yet, it is what he calls a high-quality mutation.
A high-quality mutation. Wow, applying evolutionary biology directly to human thought.
It's a profound parallel, if you
Yeah.
think about it. Look at biological evolution. A mutation is, by definition, a deviation from the accepted norm.
Right. Most of them are pretty bad.
Yeah, the vast majority of biological mutations are harmful or useless and they just die off.
Or
But every once in a long while, a genetic mutation occurs, like an opposable thumb, that is so perfectly adapted to its environment that it pushes the entire species forward.
And Lin Xiaoyang applies this exact mechanism to human culture.
He does. A high-quality mutation is a brilliant concept of justice, rights, or technology that is simply acting ahead of its time.
But being the only organism with an opposable thumb, or, the only person with a radical new idea, is an incredibly dangerous, vulnerable place to be. You are the nail sticking out.
Lin is very clear that these high-quality mutations face immense, often lethal threats. Their survival is never guaranteed.
Especially in power societies, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. In power societies, these conceptual mutations are actively hunted. Through state censorship, a lack of free press, or the merging of church and state, authoritarian systems eradicate these new ideas like a virus before they can infect the population.
Because an opposable thumb really threatens the top-down control of the people who don't have one.
That's exactly it. But even in civil societies, where the government isn't actively trying to execute you for having a new idea, the mutations are still highly vulnerable.
Because they have to survive the elements.
Right? Lin Xiaoyang describes them as growing wild in the beginning. They face the freezing elements of public apathy, deep misunderstanding, and huge corporate resistance.
So how do they survive at all?
To survive long enough to be noticed by the mainstream, they require immense serendipity. Lin goes so far as to call this protective serendipity God's power, keeping the idea alive against the odds.
He doesn't just theorize this, though. He provides a sweeping historical ledger of these mutations, doesn't he?
He really does. He traces this specific survival mechanism through the absolute giants of human history.
Like who?
He looks at ancient Greece, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. He moves forward to Augustine. He points to the drafting of the Magna Carta, which was a wild mutation suggesting a king wasn't actually above the law.
Which was completely unheard of.
Right. And he covers the massive theological shifts driven by Martin Luther and John Calvin.
Oh, think about Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses to a church door. That is the ultimate high-quality mutation. The common sense of the 16th century was that the church had a total monopoly on divine communication. Luther's idea was a radical, dangerous deviation that eventually rewired global theology.
And Lin continues the list through the philosophical breakthroughs of Spinoza and John Locke, the economic theories of Adam Smith and F.A. Hayek, all the way to the political foundation built by George Washington.
Every single one of these figures introduced a concept that violently broke the common sense of their specific era.
They were the mutations.
And this is where Lin Xiaoyang's essay takes a turn that I found absolutely brilliant. He doesn't just leave this theory locked in the dusty halls of ancient history or, academic philosophy.
He brings it right up to the present.
Yes. He pivots to make this tangibly real for us today by looking at modern technology. He identifies garage startups as the ultimate modern-day physical embodiment of these bottom-up, high-quality mutations.
The physical space of the garage is such a perfect metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is attached to the house, but it is outside the established living space.
Right.
It is where you tinker with things society just doesn't quite understand yet.
Let's dive into the specific modern examples Lin Xiaoyang uses, because when you view them through the lens of evolutionary mutations, It completely changes how you see them.
It really does. Let's start with Apple.
Yeah, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak soldering circuit boards in the garage of Jobs' parents in California to build the Apple I. At that time in the 1970s, the linguistic consensus, the common sense, was that computers were massive, room-sized mainframes owned by the Pentagon or IBM.
They're institutional.
Exactly. The idea that a single normal individual would want a personal computer on their desk was considered a useless fringe joke. It was a severe mutation.
Yet it possessed a natural utility. It empowered the individual. And because it aligned with that natural human desire for agency, it survived the garage, fought against the corporate mainframes, and eventually became the global consensus for how humanity interacts with information.
Lin Xiaoyang also points to Jeff Bezos. He launched Amazon out of a rented garage in Seattle.
Just selling books.
Right. It started as this clunky little online bookstore at a time when nobody trusted the internet, let alone trusted typing their credit card numbers into a web browser.
People thought he was crazy.
The existing retail base thought it was insane. Now it is the underlying infrastructure of global commerce.
He also highlights Larry Page and Sergey Brin. They famously rented a garage in Menlo Park to develop the early prototype of the Google search algorithm.
Another perfect example.
In all of these instances, you have individuals operating at the very bottom rung of the societal ladder. They are not relying on a king or a top-down authoritarian mandate to force people to use their product.
They're just building something better.
Exactly. They are nurturing a high-quality mutation that simply works better than the existing system. And because it works better, it slowly diffuses outward into the population.
It transitions from being some weird hobby in a dusty garage to undeniable, everyday common sense. You don't even think about it anymore.
No.
Everyone has a supercomputer in their pocket. Everyone searches the web. The fringe mutation basically becomes the boring consensus.
Which naturally leads to the ultimate question of Lin's essay. How exactly do these isolated inventions in Menlo Park, or the philosophical writings of John Locke, mechanically shift the entire human race forward?
I'm so glad we are getting to this because this is where Lin Xiaoyang pulls every single thread together into a unified theory of human progress.
It's his grand finale. To grasp his theory, we first have to understand his broader framework of how cultures develop over time. Lin divides human cultural evolution into two macro stages.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first stage is what he calls empirical culture.
I found this term a little confusing at first, actually. It sounds like a scientific laboratory, but it's kind of the opposite, right?
Yeah, the term can be tricky. An empirical culture relies purely on localized, lived experience rather than universal laws. It is a highly chaotic, messy stage of human development.
Like, how far back are we talking?
Picture an ancient tribal society. The definition of justice might change day to day depending on the mood of the chieftain or, the outcome of a recent battle, because everything relies on fragmented experience. Right and wrong are deeply ambiguous.
And because everyone has their own localized definition of reality, organic consensus is nearly impossible.
Exactly.
Which explains why empirical cultures so frequently collapse into those top-down power societies we talked about. A strong man has to step in and use violence to force a single standard onto the chaos just to keep the society from tearing itself apart.
That is the dark side of the empirical stage. But eventually, a society can mature past that chaos and enter the second stage, which Lin Xiaoyang calls scientific culture.
So this is where the progress happens.
Yes, and this isn't about people wearing lab coats. It is a cultural mindset that actively pursues objective natural consensus. It relies on clear, universally applicable definitions of right and wrong, which allows for the creation of a rule of law society built on voluntary contracts rather than forced compliance.
Okay, so we have this monumental shift from the violent chaos of empirical culture to the clearer, consensus-driven scientific culture. How did the mutations we've been talking about actually drive that forward movement?
This is Lin Xiaoyang's masterstroke. He calls it the base and upgrade theory.
Base and upgrade theory.
And it is incredibly intuitive once you see it. In any society, in any given moment in history, the current common sense, the things we all agree on right now, the laws we currently live by, that serves as the base.
It is the foundational operating system of the culture.
But true human progress requires breaking that foundation to build something better, a high-quality mutation, whether it is the Magna Carta challenging absolute monarchy or the Apple I challenging mainframe computers, that mutation acts as the upgrade.
Let's ground this in a modern frustration we probably all share. According to Lin Xiaoyang, human society operates a lot like a giant smartphone.
That's a great analogy.
The current base of our common sense is like running on iOS 1.0. We are totally used to it. We know exactly where the buttons are, and we've built our daily routines around its limitations.
We're comfortable.
Right. Then, a visionary thinker or a pair of kids in a garage code, the iOS 2.0 upgrade.
And think about what actually happens when you try to install a massive system update on your phone. It isn't a smooth process.
It is pure friction. The system initially rejects it. The new upgrade breaks all the legacy code. Your old apps start crashing.
Things stop working.
Yeah, the interface looks weird, and everyone complains that they just want the old version back.
That technological friction is the exact same friction societies experience when a new idea is introduced. Because the upgrade inherently breaks the comfortable common sense of the base, the society initially reacts with massive resistance.
The immune system attacks it.
Exactly. The new idea is marginalized, mocked, or even violently squeezed out.
But because it's a high-quality mutation, because iOS 2.0 is fundamentally superior, it fixes the old bugs and aligns more closely with natural human needs. It slowly proves its worth.
It survives the initial rejection.
Right, and one by one, people start downloading the upgrade.
And once a critical mass of the population downloads it, it achieves that linguistic and cultural consensus we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive.
And suddenly, iOS 2.0 is no longer the weird new thing. It becomes the new normal. It becomes the new base.
And then the entire cycle of human history basically resets, waiting for the next mutation in the next garage to arrive and challenge that new base.
Wow.
Lin Xiaoyang summarizes the entirety of human history as this continuous chronological loop. Upgrades appear, they fight desperately for survival against the existing base, they slowly gain consensus, and eventually they become the new base.
It's just endless iteration.
That friction, that constant tearing down, rebuilding of common sense, is the literal definition of human progress.
It is an incredibly empowering way to view the world. I mean, we started this deep dive talking about a really painful, isolating feeling. The idea that your personal sense of justice is absent or running late.
Yeah, that sense of powerlessness.
But Lin Xiaoyang's essay, published today, April 25th, 2026, took that tiny seed of personal frustration and expanded it into a grand, unified theory of everything.
He really did. He connected the dots from a peasant challenging a king with a Magna Carta, all the way to a couple of teenagers soldering motherboards in a Silicon Valley garage.
It shows us that when you feel deeply disconnected from the current consensus, you aren't necessarily wrong. You might just be holding on to a piece of code that the system simply isn't ready to install yet.
It is a powerful reminder that today's common sense is never a permanent destination. It is just the current base, and the base will always require an upgrade.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to take away today. Take a hard look around at our culture right now. Look at the bizarre, fringe, highly controversial ideas floating around on the edges of our society.
The ones that make people uncomfortable.
Yes, the concepts that the vast majority of people, maybe even you, immediately dismiss as dangerous or total nonsense.
Which of those universally rejected ideas is actually a high-quality mutation?
Exactly. Which one of those strange concepts is quietly sitting in a metaphorical garage right now, surviving against all odds, preparing to become the undeniable, universally accepted common sense of tomorrow? Your justice isn't absent. Sometimes it is just in the garage, hard at work, building the next update. Keep exploring and keep questioning the base.